Thank you for participating in the 10th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. We would like to thank our funders and individual donors, as well as our network of producing and community partners. The runtime for this panel is 60 minutes, including audience Q&A, so please leave your questions in the comments and we'll do our best to engage with them. Please follow us on all social media platforms at BlackStar Fest and use the hashtags BSFF21 and BlackStar10. Don't forget to fill out our audience evaluation, and don't forget to vote for your favorite films. We hope you have a wonderful time during the 2021 BlackStar Film Festival.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the 10th Annual BlackStar Film Festival. I'm Farah, the panel producer here at BlackStar, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to these really prolific thinkers on this panel. First up, our moderator, Samantha A. Noël, is an associate professor of art history at Wayne State University. Her research interests revolve around the history of art, visual culture, and performance of the Black diaspora. Noël's book, Tropical Aesthetics of Black Modernism, investigates how Caribbean and American artists of the early 20th century were responding to colonial and hegemonic regimes through visual and performative tropicalist representation. Noël is working on a new book tentatively titled Diasporic Art in the Age of Black Power, which seeks to examine the impact of the Black Power movement on visual art as it emerged in the political, historical, and social context of the United States and Anglophone Caribbean in the 1960s and 70s. Asia Zola King is a writer, cultural worker, executive producer, and author of the infamous 150 tweets that took the internet by storm and was made into the recent film Zola by Janixa Bravo. In 2015, she took to Twitter in what can be described as a modern retelling of the classic road trip story, recounting her journey to Florida in search of money and adventure. The captivating nature of the many twists and turns Zola masterfully laid out for the readers is credited with being the originator of the Twitter thread format. Leilah Weinraub is an artist, director, and CEO and creative director of Hood by Air, the New York-based fashion collective known for luxury ready-to-wear. Weinraub helped to radicalize fashion by championing what she calls modern people, the rising class of consumers who subvert traditional markers of race, class, and gender, and revel in freedom, lawlessness, and spectacle. As a filmmaker, Weinraub has helped document such unacknowledged tastemakers, particularly those who belong to queer, autonomous communities of color, whose creative output is often plundered by mass culture, but whose stories are rarely told on their own terms. Maya Cozier is a Trinidadian storyteller who worked as a dancer and choreographer for music videos and television shows before transitioning into film and directing. Her first feature film, She Paradise, is a coming-of-age tale which celebrates the shared joy of movement and registers the kind of chaotic and frenetic energy of the soca music scene for young women involved. She's currently pursuing an MFA at Columbia University. And last but not least is Vashni Korin, Caribbean-American journalist, filmmaker, and artist based in Los Angeles. Born in New York with roots in Barbados and Puerto Rico, her cultural background has influenced much of her research as she connects the larger diaspora through folklore, spirituality, and celebration. She has worked alongside Lizzo as a cinematographer for her upcoming documentary and produces shorts that highlight the Black history in the US. I'm so delighted to hear from you all.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Farah. So I think a great way for us to start this panel is to have all of our filmmakers just talk a little bit about your projects and just to give us like a sense of what the the overarching themes, the spirit of your works are conveying. So I think that would be a great way for our panel to begin. So I don't know. I guess Vashni, do you want to go first?
Sorry about that. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Sarah. And yeah, my work is titled You Can't Stop Spirit, and this is my first time being in the BlackStar Film Festival. So it's really a special moment for me and really exciting. And this work centers the baby dolls, and they are a Black woman Mardi Gras masking tradition that emerged during the Jim Crow era. And my film pretty much explores themes of self liberation, sexuality, and history.
Okay, great. Maya, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. I actually wrote and directed my first feature film called She Paradise. It's set in Trinidad, which is where I grew up. And it's also set in the dance community in Trinidad, which I was heavily involved with as a teenager. A lot of the stories in this feature film are based on the lives of women that I knew growing up and based on real people's stories. It's also a film cast entirely with non-actors, and it's a film that's very close to me because as a Caribbean woman, I feel like telling stories from our perspective and from our point of view is so important. And I just felt like there was a gap in cinema, especially, and I wanted to see a story that felt like my experiences. And so, She Paradise was a really personal project for me and for many of the women involved.
Okay, great. And last but not least, Leilah.
Hi. So I made a movie called Shakedown, and it's been a huge part of my life. I started when I was 23 years old, and it took about a decade and a half to complete. So it's about this lesbian strip club and the icons or the stars of that world, and just people that are like dynamic performers. And when I met them, I was like, oh, this is the real like Goodfellas, you know, and wanted to try to record it and tell that story, kind of like in the same vein, I guess, as like American or Americana, like American icons. And kind of, I went to school for documentary, or it was called media and social change. So I have like this background in maybe like urgent media and DIY works that are mostly focused on labor and community. So I kind of like came into the project with that kind of framework in mind. And I think that like what I tried to trace was like the evolution of like a utopic moment. So how things are like, the things don't just come out of nowhere. There was a lot of films, there was a lot of films at that time that were, or when I started, that I was referencing, like Paris is Burning or Rise, where it's like this phoenix out of the ashes. It's like, who knows how this culture came together? And so there was a part of the film that was really just focusing on the evolution, that it's like planned, built, created. It's very intentional. And there's like a lineage of the culture that comes from like other subcultures. And yeah, so
Great. I mean, I have to say that I really very much enjoyed viewing all of your works. It was so clear to me that you created these films that are very, they're about subjects that are clearly very close to your hearts, right? And I'll start off with, the first question. One of the common themes that I felt permeated throughout the works that you all produced and made very much had a lot to do with this notion of claiming space and making space, right? And that could be, spaces that are, in the private sphere, the public sphere, and valued or devalued real estate, right? And I also noticed that the subjects of the works of your films are very intense in different ways, right? Be it overtly or in very discreet ways, very intent on creating these spaces for themselves. And Catherine McKittrick, a gender studies scholar, she has written about the reality that the world has incorrectly denied Black populations as, deemed rather, Black populations as ungeographic, right? Populations that are oppressed by what she calls traditional geographic arrangements. And these are uh, arrangements of physical space that are white, patriarchal, Eurocentric, heterosexual, and even classed spaces, right? And when she's for the particular work that she's writing about, she's referring to women, but and I would include also not only cisgender women, but transgender women, non-binary, femme, right? And that and that enclave, right, of society and the geographic arrangements of countries that we live in, right? And I think we could also clearly extend this discussion beyond geography and think about how um, cisgender, transgender women, non-binaries, femmes are marginalized in general, right? Socially, economically, politically, culturally. But I would like us to hone in on the geographic. And so I was wondering if each of you could discuss the way in which you think the subjects in your work challenge these, traditional geographic arrangements and claim spaces in their own ways, right? Be it in the nightclubs or social arena or entertainment arenas that we saw in She Paradise, right? Or even in the public sphere that was so very evident in the work of Vashni, right? Or even like in Leilah's work, right? The film that featured women who were performing in like a private space, right? That was very much a strip club. So I mean, can you talk a little bit about the ways in which you think the subjects in your films very much challenge these modes of power and oppression, right? That literally marginalize people, people of color, right? Various marginalized communities, right, from claiming and space, but rather they are, are through their performance, through their desire to assert their subjectivities, are creating spaces, claiming spaces that are not made for them, all right, and created for them. So could you all speak to that? Anybody
try.
wants to go?
I will go
I can
first.
try. Oh, okay. Sorry.
You can go first.
No, Vashni, go ahead.
Okay. Well, yeah, so I think I would love to give some context and then kind of go into how the women in my work kind of have claimed space for themselves. And I think that starts with the origin story of these women. And so basically, this tradition extends to the early 19th century during the Jim Crow era, where Black people and women weren't able to participate in Mardi Gras in the South. And so, like we always do, we make our own thing and we kind of divert from what everybody else is doing and celebrate ourselves. And although there are multiple origin stories of this tradition, there is a more controversial story. And it is that the massacres came from Storyville, which was the red light district at the time in New Orleans, and were indeed women of the night or sex workers. And the other origin story is that it descended from families that passed the tradition down during throughout the generations, right? And so I think it is important to celebrate and acknowledge all aspects of the story, and most importantly, shed light on the fearlessness that these women exhibited during a time where it wasn't quite safe for women to be on the street. And they basically, they danced and paraded on Carnival Day, and they often carried switch knives in their garter, and really formed sisterhood amongst Black women, where they would protect and look out for one another. And I think that the carnival space really allowed this to thrive, because carnival is all about the inversion of the social order. And so, whoever you aren't able to be or express in your day to day life in society, whatever's constraining the body or the mind, is now able to be inverted on this day. And humor is added, and debauchery, and they drink and they smoke and they cuss, and they are almost able to just exhibit total freedom and freedom of expression. And so I think that this is one of the reasons that really brought me to these women and brought me to this space, because, I think in my own day-to-day life, there's definitely constraints with who I have to show up as at work, or as a daughter, as a sister. But, the carnival space allows everyone to exhibit freedom and to really allow the self to emerge. And so that's the gist of that. I know Maya's work also kind of speaks about carnival, well, not totally, but just performance in Trinidad. And I watched She Paradise, and it was just so beautiful. So I'm curious too, like, how is that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also thinking about the barrack yards in Trinidad and how, these were spaces for the Black population to express themselves and to have a sort of like a safe space. And I think, I'm also thinking about the Jamet too, and if you read some of the colonial articles that talk about Jamets or talk about this time, they would say that all the Jamets on the street during carnival, like lifting up their tops and flashing their boobs, and the language in which they describe it as sort of being animalistic or vulgar. And it's like, now like I'm making this film about these women where it's something that is celebrated, and it's something that gives them power, and it's their freedom to express themselves. And I think yeah, creating space is just about kind of like finding ways to you know assert who you are without the kind of confines or I guess like the colonial days. Um but yeah, I think also too, like their sisterhood, as you were talking about sisterhood, like their sisterhood, um, is like something that they that they have, power in. Like they have control over this space when they're alone and when they're together. And they're kind of using that sisterhood as a way to support each other, to advance economically, however they see fit. But I think, yeah, there is a lot of I do feel like the women, um, in She Paradise, are definitely like claiming space by just being. If there's another way to just put it
Right.
simply, especially on the history of where they're coming from and the context of that, especially in the carnival space and in Trinidad.
I guess that's on the sisterhood idea. Um, in Shakedown, it was like, still where gay bars were a place where you found your chosen family. And I think in the film, or maybe because of the film, I've been thinking about, if is it still like that anymore? Is it necessary to have that space to find your chosen family? Does it happen in other ways now? Has it evolved past that? or have we kind of like, or is it just actually too expensive to do that? Like in LA, things are not cheap anymore. It was like the major feature of the city was that it was easy in some ways to experiment because it was inexpensive, and it's not like that anymore. So anyway, I was also thinking about like Ronnie. I think about her a lot, and just like how she kind of talks about herself as like a CEO and uses this kind of like corporate narrative to talk about like money and finance and success, and like interrogating that. And I feel like we've all, in ways taken on like a paradigm of success. And like I think that the one thing was to try to like talk about it, and to see if those markers of success or growth or movement are benefiting us, and you know what I mean by that?
Definitely. I think that's an interesting point you make. Well, the first point you made, Leilah. Is that how you say my name? Leilah, Leilah. I'm sorry if I'm
Leela, yeah,
mispronouncing.
it's Leela.
Leila. Yeah,
Leela.
but I think the first point you made about whether or not these physical spaces are still seen as relevant and important means of creating family, establishing community. I thought that was an interesting point, especially right given the inflation and surge in the cost of real estate. But even yeah, the other point you made, oh my God, and which just escaped my mind, the point you just made, I think it's interesting to think about how like these spaces function and work for various marginalized, right, and communities that have to deal with the everyday struggles, right, of living under institutionalized oppression,
Yeah.
right, and why not, yeah,
Right.
these
I was talking
spaces,
about markers of success, I guess,
right, right,
and
right, right,
growth
and then
and growth. Because like I
yeah,
feel like people want to continually grow and build their thing and
right,
make it bigger,
right,
and it
right,
has to go on to like the next phase. But I've just been thinking a lot about, do things need to grow like as a marker of success,
right, right. Yeah, because I mean, I think ultimately, people, regardless of who they are, where they come from, they certainly do want to have opportunities to self-actualize, right? But if the predominant conventional model is the only means, right, or only example you have of what constitutes success, you would sort of like mirror that and try to replicate it in some way, right? So I think that's an interesting point that you made. And also, Vashni, I don't know if you are aware of, I mean, there is a traditional carnival masquerade tradition in Trinidad called the
Mhm.
Baby Duel. I don't know if
Yeah,
I actually did a lot of research for that for my dissertation. But yeah, so you are familiar with that tradition, the Baby Duel
yes,
masquerade in Trinidad. Okay, yeah, because I didn't know
yes.
it existed in New Orleans.
Yeah, actually, I learned that it existed in Trinidad while I was doing the research on the baby dolls in New Orleans. And what's interesting is, from what I've heard through speaking to other people who also, strangely enough, like do research on carnival culture, is that you can't really catch them in the street very often. They're not easy to find necessarily, and that's just what I've heard. And in New Orleans, this tradition has continued to expand so much, and so many women are inviting other women to be a part of it, and it's really blossomed, which is a beautiful thing. But I'm very curious what how they compare and contrast in Trinidad and
Yeah,
in New Orleans, and like were they ever like how did that happen? Like were they ever in conversation, or how did that
right.
connection kind of
Yeah.
transfer?
It is quite interesting. And, as Maya rightly brought up, you can't help but, within the context of Trinidad Carnival, you can't help but think about the jamet, right? And that the woman, right, this underclass, working class, right, Black woman, right, who was seen as the antithesis of what a woman or a lady should be or should aspire to be, right? I mean, many of them, you know, the baby doll masquerade, while it existed in the late 19th, early 20th century, was often masqueraded by women who were seen and you know, right, and given that yeah, not title but like that descriptor of jamets, right? They were often the ones who performed, and jamets were often sex workers, right? And so, you know, within this theme too of you know, we're talking about jamets and the baby doll, and I'm thinking too about the kind of sexually explicit performances that jamets in Trinidad Carnival would often do during that era, and even just what the kind of sexually explicit performances of women in Trinidad Carnival do today, right? I think that's very much in line with the kind of performances that we saw in Leilah's documentary, and that kind of performance is very much you know, the spirit of the nature performances in your work, Vashni, right? You can't stop the spirit. But I think what was really captivating about all of your works are the ways in which you captured visually the bodies of your subjects, right, in very unique and very interesting ways. And of course, some you know, scenes featured long shots. Okay, I'm not a film person, but I think that's the correct term of like long shots versus close-ups, right? So some of them featured like long shots of the subjects as they performed. Others featured close shots of body parts. And collectively, I think, you know, what was really interesting when reflecting on all of your works, I think they all work in offering a very effective and meaningful visual conveyance of Black woman X. And I use the term woman X, that the X replaces the A or the E in the word woman or woman, right? And that refers to cisgender, transgender, non-binaries, and femmes, right? So, like I said, I think they all work in offering these really meaningful conveyances of Black woman X immersed in performance. I think we all did a wonderful job of that. And these performances are, of course, sexually explicit. I think, you know, the majority of them were, including, I mean, we don't have Zola here with us, but even in her film, as the film that's based on her experience, right, a few years ago, right, that was very clear, and in all of your works, right, that performances that were sexually explicit. And I think oftentimes when people view these films, or even are in situations where women are performing and expressing themselves in a way that is sexually explicit, there's often a tendency to view these women as objectifying themselves, or people may view them as sexual objects, right? As even like disempowering themselves, right? What possibilities do you think exist in the sexual objectification of these women X in your works? And it could be a self objectification and or the objectification of others, right? What do you think are the possibilities that exist in sexual objectification? And also, in what ways do you think they differ or are similar in heteronormative spaces and in queer spaces? So it's kind of like a two-pronged question, but yeah, what are the possibilities you think that exist in objectification? Well, there's Zola. Hi.
Hi, I'm
Zola just
so
joined
sorry.
us.
I was trying to fix my connection forever. Hi.
Oh no. So
Hi.
glad that you can. Yeah, so I just asked a question, Zola, that you know, particularly since in all of your works, I think there's often a tendency to perceive the women in the films as um, sexually objectifying themselves, or even becoming disempowered because they're viewed as sexual objects. But I'm asking, like, what possibilities exist in sexual objectification? What do you think are the possibilities? So that was a question I posed to everyone. So whoever wants to go first.
That's like a really hard question, but is it okay if I just tell you a little bit about process and maybe the answer is embedded in
Sure.
that? So over time, I would try to tape people and show them, like have them participate in the image and like what it looks like, and try to understand like how like what the show they were doing was and how they wanted to be maybe seen. I would watch other people like tape and just see how they kind of maybe focused in a little too tightly, and just wanted to have an open dialogue with the performers about like what actually looks good and how to like capture what it feels like or the feeling that they're trying to like make happen. I like yeah, it's okay to start there.
I don't know. I think in my experience personally, being a sex worker and a dancer and all that good stuff, like even just in this black body that I'm in, I'm sexually objectified anyways. Like it's something that I don't really have much control over. So since I already exist in that space, I kind of had to learn how to get comfortable with it. Not necessarily the objectification of it, but just my sexuality and the fact that when certain people see me, they see sex. That's just what it is, based off of my body shape or my occupation or whatever. I'm whatever the reason being, I know that, and so I think that through that knowledge, I just grew comfortable with it. And now, like me using it to my advantage, I think that's when it becomes an issue for other people. Because it's like you're willing to sexually objectify me, yes, but then when I'm making money off that sexual objectification, now, whoa, let me slow down. So, it's like a thin line with it. But for me, I mean, sex sells. So like there's money in sexual objectification. There's money in it, there's art in it, and I've kind of just found that space and walked that line to my benefit.
Any other thought?
I think for the women in my work and the baby doll women, what I find really fascinating is that they are taking ownership of their body. They're not really concerned about who's looking, if men are looking, if other women are looking. They are totally in control of how they appear and how they are perceived. It's like it's really about the self and what makes them feel good. And I think that has been so empowering and makes them extremely powerful.
Mm.
Yeah, and I can jump in on that. I feel like, especially when I was a teenager and I was actively dancing and modeling, that experience of like being in front of the camera or in that position as a performer, you really think like, based off of what Zola is saying and how she's aware of the gaze, but she still finds a way to feel powerful. I think, are we just like diminished objects, or can a female object, quote unquote, turn themselves into a subject by manipulating the male gaze, um, and exploiting it to their benefit, making money off of it? You know what I mean? And I think um, you can wield a greater agency by sort of like being aware of that gaze and sort of capitalizing off of it or like using it to your advantage. So I don't even see like women, especially women in the performance space or like the entertainment space, dancers, as like, even if someone may see them as diminished objects, like I think I guess I don't really see it, that way, because I think, I think that there's a lot of power and agency that can come from that kind of like power interaction.
Right. And I think, what the responses that you all gave were, really, I think, quite powerful. And it really, I think, reflects the spirit of the name of our panel, right? Lower frequency politics, and trying to, I believe it was, yeah, like Maya, you kind of responding to and piggybacking on ideas that the others presented about within that like realm of objectification, trying to find what possibilities exist of exerting agency, right, and opportunities for exerting power as well, right, that in a very nuanced and interesting way could disrupt the power dynamic that exists between the performer and the viewer who is inactive but whose gaze is fully, like encroaching almost, right? And certainly, fully on the performer. So I think there's something quite interesting in thinking about, not I think to just say that women performers, right, women ex performers, right, who engage in sexually explicit performance are objectifying themselves is it's so very reductive, and there it is a very I think the experience of self objectification, as you all like certainly elucidated on, is a very complex situation that is multi-layered, multifaceted. And I think in a similar way, when we think about the possibilities of objectification, right? I think it, in an interesting way, allows us to have a better understanding, right, of how multifaceted, how complex, right, how even constantly in flux, right, this notion of a Black woman X subjectivity is, right, it's constantly changing and evolving, regardless of what, right, others, how other people might perceive us and our bodies, right, to piggyback on Zola's point, right, we could still try to in our own ways, right, exert a particular level of agency and ownership, right, even though they may still see it as within this rubric of the object, right, the dehumanized Black woman X. So I think that's something really interesting about that. And I think in very interesting and fascinating ways, you're all, I think, captured that the spirit of this notion of the possibilities of objectification, for sure. All right, so I'm looking at the time, and I know we do have to leave some room for Q&A. So I think I will jump to a question that I think flows nicely and very much is connected to this discussion right now about sexually explicit performance, but this idea of the erotic. So Audre Lorde, the legendary Black feminist, she wrote an essay that I think, I remember when I first read it, I was just absolutely blown away, and it was very influential and inspiring for my work. But she wrote an essay titled Uses of the Erotic as Power. And in it, she defines the erotic as quote, a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane, firmly rooted in the power of our unexpressed or unrecognized feeling, end quote. So for her, the erotic can be anything from the way the body stretches to music, to dancing, building a bookcase, writing a poem, or even making love to your partner. So she says that self-connection shared, that self-connection shared is a measure of the joy which I know myself to be capable of feeling, a reminder of my capacity for feeling. So Lord really encourages women, and I think, women X people, right, to be aware of and critique those patriarchal models of power that sanction the repression of the erotic. And for her, the repression of the erotic, it really is pornographic, right? This term, this notion of pornography, right? For her, that is the repression of the erotic. And for her, this is really the suppression of one's true feelings. So in what ways do you think all of your films, your works, are contributing to this rethinking of the notion of the erotic that Audre Lorde is presenting to us, right? Any thoughts? not seeing erotic as like dirty and seedy and something that you shouldn't engage in because it's pornographic, right? But something that's more holistic and really deeply for like what she calls female, deeply spiritual.
For me, and that's what I meant when I said what I said earlier about sexual objectification. Like some people would call it that, but I call what I do and what I've done, and the stories that I've shared, it was more so sexual expression, because it was kind of like first nature to me. Like I did what I wanted to do out of confidence and out of, just wanting that experience, and it's a certain feeling of love and experience and ecstasy that comes through my sexuality, and that's I'm comfortable in expressing that. So, I mean, I guess I agree with that point. I think it makes sense. Everyone has their opinion, but for me personally, I agree with that. That makes complete sense in my experience.
Oh, we can't hear you, Leilah. I think you're muted.
Sorry, I feel like it's really important to check how much you're censored or self-censoring work in terms of like sexual like explicitness. And I think it's really important to be what was important for me in this work to be like super explicit and to not kind of tamp it down or edit it out. And there's like power in that performance, yeah, like power and creativity and the explicit nature of the performance. And I think if you don't, anyway, so yeah, I love that piece, and I totally agree too.
And Vashni and Maya, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, I've been really obsessed with this idea of transformation as it relates to femininity and what makes femininity what it is. On one side, you think about femininity having aspects of being maternal or being a caretaker, or just things that are innate, that maybe are more, that just are innate to what it is to be a woman, right? And then on the other side, there's this aspect which is the transformative aspect, and that is ever changing and ever blooming, and it's being connected to your sexuality, it's being connected to growth. And I've been really diving deeply into that. And I think that the women in my work, the baby dolls, they are deeply connected to the transformational aspect of what the feminine is. And I think that's something that we've almost lost in some way, just the ability to be able to explore everything that makes us who us are without it being boxed. So that, I don't know if that contributes to the erotic in some way, but I think the erotic and sexuality kind of go hand in hand with that notion.
Yeah, I think in She Paradise, the lead goes through this transformation of, learning has, these erotic powers, and she, is no longer afraid to sort of use them. But I think she kind of, finds or taps into her eroticism through the sisterhood and through dance and through movement. And, ironically, the one sort of like sexual experience that she has with a man is like, it's not where she finds anything, and it becomes a devastating disappointment. But I do think that she does go through like this whole journey of like learning that about herself and tapping into that.
Right. Yeah, and I think even to piggyback on a point that was raised earlier, I think that all of you kind of touched on with this notion of community, right? I think it's interesting how in the your portrayals of your female and woman-X subjects, the erotic was conveyed not necessarily in sexual encounters, and if there were sexual encounters with someone of the opposite sex or the same sex or what have you, they weren't as, I think, as remarkable and powerful as the expression, the corporeal expressions of the erotic, right, that existed in the performance space that often, with women of the same gender, right, with women acts of this, like collectively, right, either with other performers, right, that you're performing with, or even like in the case of Leilah's film, right, where this was primarily an LGBTQ plus space, right? So there were interesting connections happening with performers and the viewers slash participants, right, in that particular case. But I think there's something to be said about these unrecognized feelings, to quote Audre Lorde, right, that were shared and experienced as a collective. I think there was something quite remarkable and powerful about that. Yeah. Farah, how are we doing with time? Do we have any questions, or should I pose another question myself? Oh, okay. Yes, yes. I will. I could read it out. Do you want me to read it out, or do you want to read it out? Or... Okay, I'll read it. Okay. All right, so our first audience question is, I'd love to hear more about shine, splendor, and spectacle. Can you talk about the visual approaches that you used when thinking about light and costuming, how you might have played with frame rate or lighting setups, and how you work with the craft and creative expression embedded in the cultures you're a part of as you're rendering these cinematic representations? Or even in your case, Zola, how you're adoring yourself, or Leilah, how you're using fashion and streetwear to expand notions of gender and race. It's a great question. Or questions. So
Does Zola want to go?
Oh, sure. Well, for me,
joining,
and our
yeah.
was it was time based because remember this whole experience and these things happened in 2015, so we wanted the entire film in itself to kind of feel like you jumped into a time capsule and you're now back in 2015. So since this was an actual like experience and something that happened to me in real life, we really just, it was all references. We referenced pictures and what we were wearing, the music we were listening to, the things we were doing at that time. And I really have Janixa and the costume designer she brought on to really thank for that. I mean, this was my first rodeo, so I was just like, the sacrificial lamb. I just had the experience, and then they took all the creativity and made it do what it do. So all the technicalities, that would be their business to speak on. However, me experiencing and watching the creative process, timing was a big thing. And Janixa kept saying, like, we need it to be very 2015. We need it to be, and the outfits kind of tell a story as they go. For example, there was a point in the film where at this point I'm like completely over Stephanie, right? Like I'm done with her, but she's still extremely cute. Like you can't lie and say the girl is not a gorgeous woman. Even in real life, the actual woman, she's beautiful. Like you can't deny her that. So at the point where she and I are obviously enemies, but I'm still obviously infatuated with her looks and her confidence and her sex work. She was wearing this gorgeous, like I want to say it was Versace, and it was like a snake outfit. Like that was one of those things that they had deep thought on. Like she needs to obviously be in snake skin because she's got us messed up. However, she needs to look really good. So it was like things like that. Just those little, details that I wouldn't have picked up on had I not had an amazing team.
I kind of just wanted to remind everybody what it feels like to go out at night a lot. And kind of like there was this thing that I convinced myself that there's people that work at night that are doing like this kind of like energy work for daytime people. and kind of like maybe are running the world in ways. And there is like a feeling and a sound and a way that you remember the way it looked about when you're out at night, like on your way home, it kind of echoes. And you're like, wait, did that happen? Or what was that person's face? What did they look like? Or like, did I actually see that? Or like, what were they playing? And it comes together really like these foggy pieces, you know? And so, like, in terms of like the frame rate and the camera, like, I used a prosumer camera and made it for like shot in all really low light situations, and just really tried to like stretch those, like, each frame to the maximum that it could go, and really like get these like pulses of light into the frame and into the picture, you know, to really make you feel like you're there and experience what it feels like to be, um, to watch these looks come at you, you know? I feel like a nightclub is like also really like a runway in a way too, where people are, you enter, and the looks are coming at you, and you have like a really physical reaction to it, you know? And yeah, expand notions of gender and race. I mean, that's a whole nother answer to that. But I think that like yeah, that's all I have to say about it. Oh, that was the end of my sentence. Sorry that I like stumbled over it. That was a period.
Maya, do you want to respond? Because I think you definitely incorporated, and I think the notion of like shine and spectacle certainly applies to She Paradise for sure, and your use of lighting as well.
Yeah, to be honest, very little of it came from my head, and a lot of it came from the environment. So there's a bar that we scouted that was on the corner of Nelson and Duke Street, that I think has been closed down since the early 2000s, but completely preserved. And in it, there's murals with Caribbean icons and Rastafari imagery everywhere. Um, and red, green, and yellow in on every wall. And so basically, our approach was to just kind of like highlight the space and what was there already. Um, and so the TP and I would do things like light the bar space through the red curtain that was actually there, so that this space just had this red tint. But to be honest, a lot of it came from like outing and like being in the space and allowing the space to inform me and to tell me what the vision is. And just so there was very like little altering, like the bar space wasn't something we constructed or painted. Like all those sets kind of existed in the Trinidad space already. um and wardrobe was also very important to us. I worked with a wardrobe stylist, Chandel, who actually danced in the same group as me when we were growing up. And I remember like when I was on television every week, like dancing, we would have to come up with different costumes, which meant going, like downtown Port of Spain to buy fabrics and, different colors and putting together our costumes every week. And so that we kind of kept that spirit alive. A lot of the costumes were, created by Chandel herself, and she would go and find fabrics and make the looks. And so I think, yeah, like that kind of like creative vision or visual element was like such a huge part of the processing, telling the story.
What about you, Vashni? Because I also think that I mean, even though a lot of it was shot in the public sphere, I think the way that you capture these women in costume really lends to this notion of spectacle as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I was really New Orleans, I lived in New Orleans for about 5 years. And I kind of wanted to make the film in the way that New Orleans made me feel. And in New Orleans, I often felt like I was living in this dream-like city. Like I would experience talking to people on the street and I would be like, is this even real? Like they're speaking to the exact thing I may be grappling with earlier this morning or whatever. So I really wanted to play with that, with how I use the camera. And there is a lot of slow motion in the work, depicting the women in the work. But also, it jumps right into the everyday life and the day to day. So I really wanted to play with time and space in that way. And I guess in relation to their costumes or their attire, with the idea of presentation, I think visibility is so important for the women in the work, and it's all about being seen. Like they wear a lot of glitter and they wear short skirts and they have different colors on, and they're all trying to kind of like be the most visible on Carnival Day, because then again, going back to what I was saying earlier, in the day-to-day life, they may not be seen in the same way that they'd be seen on Carnival Day. And so it's really like all about the pageantry. Like the pageantry is super important. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm glad we got this question because it pretty much is similar to the question I was going to ask that I had to skip over. So it works out perfectly. But I think we're out of time, right? I think this is pretty much the end of it. But we just went 2 minutes over. That's fine. But I really this was really great. I mean, I think this was a really wonderful discussion and an exchange of ideas. And thank you all for your brilliant and really inspiring work. And I'm sure the viewers were able to learn and gain so much from your films, but also a lot of the interesting thoughts and ideas that you presented today in response to the questions. So thank you guys. I guess we're signing off.